Hello, everyone. Excuse me, and welcome to another episode of the 8-Bit Adventures podcast. This is a weekly podcast, and we're here to bring you the latest and greatest geeky news of the past week. I am your host, Sean Hayes. So my wonderful co-host, Courtney Bolin, is not with us again this week. So to start off the show, unfortunately, Courtney's not doing very well. And as such, she is going to have to take a step back from the podcast for some amount of time. Hopefully it's not too long, but she is going to take however long she needs to get better. So I do have a plan in place, or I'm putting a plan in place on what to do for content, but unfortunately, it's one of the things that she had to cut back on. So if we could just give Courtney our support, we hope you get better. And we miss you. So hope you get well soon, Courtney. All right. Now that that's out of the way, as I said, I do have a plan in place. So I'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. Of some of the stuff that we have coming up over the next couple of weeks. So yeah, why don't we get into tonight's quickfire news? A lot of it is going to filter right into our deep dive, which is going to be about D&D Live 2021. So here are this past week's quickfire news topics. All right. So the big news this week that's on everybody's minds is Valve has announced a portable handheld PC gaming console, quote unquote, computer, quote unquote, called the Steam Deck, which will run Steam OS for 3 different models ranging from $399 to $649. The primary difference between the three is the amount of internal storage. And the highest tier one also has anti-glare, an anti-glare screen. But otherwise, performance-wise, they're all the same. So, unfortunately, excuse me, we're going to talk about this probably next week in a little bit more detail. But just wanted to throw that out there. This was kind of the big news that dropped. So one of the things we'll talk about is what does this mean for the Switch? So up next, Netflix, the streaming company, has hired Mike Verdu, formerly of EA and Facebook, to head up a new gaming division. This is sort of a timely announcement as they're formally making their push into gaming to expand their user base, because it has come to light that they have lost 400,000 subscribers across the US and Canada. So Netflix looking to expand into gaming as a way to sort of branch out and continue further growth amidst these subscriber losses. And speaking of Netflix, on August 12th, an animated feature film will premiere, Monster Hunter Legends of the Guild. So this is going to sort of tie into the Monster Hunter world aspect. I don't know, storyline, I guess. Which, I mean, it's all set in the world of Monster Hunter, but specifically that area. And I believe it follows like one of the NPC hunters, like growing up. I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for that. It looks like it's going to be a more true to form Monster Hunter story than the Monster Hunter feature film, starring Mila Jovovich. Again, that's coming out on Netflix on August 12th. So coming soon. All right. This is where we're going to get into the D&D quickfire news segment, basically. For D&D Live 2021, they came out with a bunch of announcements, some of them, previously unannounced projects, and some providing more details on projects that were previously announced. Oh my goodness, I forgot to do all of my slides. So, we're gonna skip. There we go. First, I've had all these slides prepared. I totally forgot them. First up is Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. So this is going to be the unannounced book. This is so for those who are familiar with Fizban, Fizban's a character from Dragonlance, thought to be Bahamut Paladine, like in disguise as a mortal. Um, so has like a tie-in to dragons. This is not a Dragonlance book. This is sort of using Fizban as like the author of essentially a Draconomicon, which has appeared in previous editions of Dungeons and Dragons. It's such a big old book of dragons. So as Aaron Engineer points out in the chat, like Volo for Volo's Guide to Monsters. Like Volo, so Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So much in that style. So it's going to have like little notes here and there from Fizban in his own particular unique way. And we're going to talk more in depth about what's going to be in this book later in this episode. This is going to release October 19th, 2021. So this fall. Next up, The Wild Beyond the Witchlight. We got a little bit more information on this. So this is the Feywild adventure book that's going to release September 21st of this year. It's going to feature Domains of Delight, which are intended to be sort of a whimsical reflection of Ravenloft's Domains of Dread. Opportunities for characters to fully progress and complete the adventure without resorting to combat. And displacer kittens. So playing up a lot of like the whimsical nature of the Feywild, while also, you know, having like some sort of seedy undercurrents to it. That, you know, it is the Feywild, so it's danger. It's not all sunshine and lollipops and rainbows. It's that plus there are sort of dangerous bargains being made. So, again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth. And I'll be taking questions from the chat if you have them. So September 21st is this adventure book. There is an alt cover. There's also an alt cover for Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. Folks who are watching live can see the alt covers. But for Wild Beyond the Witchlight, it will feature said little displacer beast kitten. So next up is Strixhaven, a curriculum of chaos. So this is the Magic the Gathering crossover setting. Excuse me. So the Magic the Gathering crossover setting, focusing on magical school. So this is for a lot of you that have ever wanted to run sort of a magic school campaign in Dungeons and Dragons. This will have all sorts of modules on how to do that, like structuring a magical school campaign where you start at level 1 as like a first year student, and as you progress up through levels, it's to sort of represent like you don't progress levels sort of until you reach certain milestones in progressing through your curricula. Non-combat systems to enhance roleplay. We'll get into those later. And notably will not feature the sort of class agnostic subclasses that were in the recent UNA or Unearthed Arcana that we talked about on the podcast. Feedback apparently was universally bad, like universally negative. And so they scrapped them. This one, like the other books, will have an alt cover as well. Very pretty. It's got, it's sort of an indigo with almost like a brassy sort of patterning on it, with this very intricate sort of upside down like lotus with star points and very geometric symbols. So it's made to look almost like a spell book. Very, very pretty. I mean, like I like the alt covers for all 3 of these books. But I think this is the strongest alt cover out of the 3 of them. And then finally in our quickfire news, probably the weirdest news that we have this week is D&D is partnering with Nerds Candy for specialty boxes of candy that will contain codes for custom Dungeons and Dragons adventures. Yeah, that's what we got here. So each of the boxes will feature basically nerds of a different D&D class. So we can see there's Ranger, we can see a fighter, there's a wizard, what looks like a cleric, a bard, and a rogue. All in the sort of announcement image. It's really weird. I kind of enjoy that they're doing a lot of this weird sort of marketing with other products that are tangentially adjacent to it, even if it's a little bit tongue in cheek from the name. It kind of like when World of Warcraft did the partnership with Mountain Dew, and they had the 2, like the Horde and Alliance flavored Mountain Dew. Weird sort of cross promotional stuff like this. I don't know if I think Overwatch may have done a crossover promotion with Doritos. I know they did one with Pringles, but I don't know if they did one with Doritos, which would have made sense for I can't remember her name. Yeah. With, she's got the mech that blows up. Can't remember her name, but that's fine. Not important to the current news at hand. So, all right. So that is that Diva. Yes, thank you. Yes, Diva. So that is going to wrap up our quickfire news for this week. Again, very D&D oriented. We're gonna do a big deep dive on it and go into sort of the guts of these books and what's in them and sort of new stuff, new uncharted territory perhaps for Dungeons and Dragons. So why don't we do that right now? Here is our deep dive. Okay. So I did see some comments in the chat about from VIP member Driz talking about Fizbans. So you will be happy to know Gem Dragons and Revised Dragonborn, including Gem Dragonborn and the Revised Kobolds, will be in Fizban's guide, or Fizban's guide to everything. Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. So those are confirmed as being in there. There will also be spells, feats. So sort of like Volos more than Mordenkainen's. This will be a book that has appeal for both dungeon masters and players, is that there will be player options in there. It will have sort of more information surrounding dragons. So we kind of have yet to see if there's going to be stuff that has appeared in like Draconomicons in the past, where like alternate features for dragons or additional like weird breath weapon modifiers. And they did mention there's going to be like a number of additional dragons. I think purple, like deep dragons may have been mentioned. So I don't know if we're going to also see like gray dragons, brown dragons. I would love personally for like adamantine, mithril, and iron dragons to make a comeback. But I don't think they will, because Wizard seems to like not want to have anything to do with 4th edition. But those were really interesting dragon types. But yeah, so it will have a return of gem dragons. We do have stats for sapphire dragons, or at least an adult sapphire dragon from it was released on D&D Beyond. Like I think it was previously people had to buy some sort of like special D20 or something. That was like an anniversary D20. to get it. But then it was also released like digitally for people as like a very minor nominal purchase. Um, so this will have fully expanded, so like wormlings all the way up to um, ancient, uh, and lots of options for new Dragonborn players. Um, so yeah, a lot of the concept art for Gem Dragon boards, they have a lot of telekinetically floating pieces around them, so very cool. Um, I don't know if they're gonna have any sort of unified psionics stuff going on, since 5e kind of moved away from doing that and just like let psionics kind of be very individual things for individual classes. Um, yeah, also no word on draconians, although it would be a bit odd to have a book featuring a Dragonlance character, like heavily featuring a Dragonlance character, and not at least having uh like draconians entered in as like having like alternate features like you saw in Tasha's for Dragonborn, as a way to like sub stuff out to just make a draconian. Um so yeah. So that'll be interesting. It'll also be interesting what sort of magic items, if any, because you could really do a whole bunch of like specifically dragon focused magic items. Um, One thing that they did talk about, and this was, oh geez, I got to look up who said the quote, but it's one of the authors, um, James Wyatt. It's one of the design leads who did a bunch of work for previous editions of D&D. Um, had a really interesting quote, and that's introducing this concept that every dragon in Dungeons and Dragons like has an echo of itself in every other setting. Um, so to make it like this is not Dragonlance specific, but is intended to be usable for every campaign setting. Um, and all the material in the book to be used for every campaign setting. So with the caveat that so long as your campaign setting features dragons, or has dragons in them. And the idea being that uh, every dragon that's in a prime material plane has an echo of itself across every other prime material plane setting. And this is not to say that like it's hang on. Let me try and find the exact quote because I have it right here. Um, oh, maybe I don't. Sorry, all this dead air is great. For audio listeners, hang on a second. Um, nope, man. But that's basically the idea. Is that it's not like when a dragon is created that like it's created like simultaneously across all the realms or whatever, or like or that it implies the existence of like if one dragon does something in one realm, like it does the same thing across all. Like it's not that they exist simultaneously on all realms. It's that uh that dragons were created intrinsically as part of every prime material setting. Again, with the caveat that has dragons in them, uh, and thus these echoes, right? It's the same dragon, but it's just showing that that dragon exists in the setting. So let's see. Aaron Engineer said this implies the existence of dragon gods who may have died. I mean that is Io's whole shtick. So Io is the progenitor dragon god, who in some sort of war in some primordial war with gods and titans and everything, um was sundered Um, we haven't heard IO mentioned in a game in a long time. IO was definitely mentioned in 4th edition, and has been mentioned in 5th edition. I mean, they talk about IO with the beginnings of Bahamut and Tiamat. And the idea is that like from Io sprung forth Bahamut, Tiamat, and the Ruby Dragon, whose name I can't remember. But basically, the gods of metallic, chromatic, and gem dragons all sprang forth from them, representing different facets of Io. Sardior, yes, the Ruby Dragon. So it's also presumably going to have stuff in the book on how to like use good dragons as antagonists. Because that's something that 4E kind of explored a little bit, was after the controversy of not including them in the monster manual at all, because under the idea that like you should really only need stats for stuff that you're going to fight. So they didn't give you stats for them. But the idea of, I mean, they might be good, but it's also, what does it mean to be good when you are a near divine being that, can live for potential, I mean, thousands of years, maybe even immortal, and you just keep growing and you keep getting bigger and you are like a primal elemental force, essentially. What is your view of good versus what is considered good by like these mortals that come and go in a blink of an eye? Even like elves come and go in a blink of an eye. Um, and essentially like, are like very, very tiny little livestock. Uh, so, and would that be, would that still fit the same values of goodness that they fit? So yeah, we'll see a lot of interesting concepts in there. A lot of this stuff was previewed in the Dragon UA. So we also saw there's a monk subclass and a ranger subclass that is going to be in the book. No word on any other subclasses. We haven't seen any previewed. So it might just be the two. There's a little bit of grumbling about that. I think there's also been some revisions to the Drake Warden, which is the Ranger subclass from the playtest that they did. So it'll be interesting to see what changes they make to that. So for those who have ever wanted to play a Dragon Rider, that's basically how you get to do it. Is you like to formally play a Dragon Rider class is you got to pick my favorite class in the game. Got to be a Ranger. So all right. Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Lot of information, a lot of sort of background information on this. So it's going to feature a carnival. Like most of the things going to be set in this carnival that's focused around like delighting people. There's 3 realms in this sort of domain of delight, hither, thither, and yon, that are all, featuring sort of different realms of whimsy and fancy. Actually, we can. There we go. So we've got that. A lot of really interesting stuff. So there's like a treehouse wielding, Barrett wearing treant that like takes in runaway children and like keeps them safe. And their mascot is a little tiny displacer kitten. So you have an element of like the Lost Boys there. But really the most intriguing thing is this idea that they actually put in there, and they explicitly put in there, that there are methods to resolving everything in this campaign without having to go through combat, and that it's actually a much easier adventure to do it that way. So that's really interesting to me. And it kind of encapsulates like one of the sort of sometimes criticism, sometimes just explanation of Dungeons and Dragons is that it caters, like, based on the rules that are in the player's handbook, it caters to one style of play. Um because like the perspective being, um like, sure, you can do free form role play and then have like rules for combat. Um but when you present like a whole bunch of rules that are all suited for essentially combat, um because admittedly when D&D tries to do rules for like exploration or social interaction, they tend to fall flat a little bit. um it gives at least a presentation of, I mean, this is a combat oriented game. um and to a certain extent it's kind of hard to argue against that. um the arguments on the other of like, well, you can totally do free form role playing, uh and like that's like guided by skill checks and everything. But then the sort of counter argument to that is, well, you could do that with combat too, and that's what a lot of like sort of lighter RPGs do, like Powered by the Apocalypse, essentially, where, I mean, everything's just resolved by like kind of singular die rolls, um, or Fate or something, where there are often just as many or just as few rules concerning combat as there are other aspects of the game. Um, Alternatively, you can also go in the other direction and have rules for like everything, which is sort of the take that like Pathfinder does. Um, and in which like it feels like a fuller, robust experience. Um, but it then does mean that you have a lot more to learn. Um, so I'm kind of interested to see what they do. I have a feeling it's just going to be resulting to like skill checks, um, and maybe picking up on like information here and there. And like if you present this information, like they might react a certain way or their attitude improves. Um, I mean, it'd be really interesting to see them like introduce an actual subsystem or an actual module, um, to kind of flesh out the other tiers a little bit. And I know they tried to do this with exploration, um, with mixed results. I mean, it often still comes down to like uh, you make a survival check, or you have a ranger in the party, or the whole fact that like ranger design wise, like people go back and forth on whether uh, they're just really good at doing their job at exploring, or if they just like, if it means that if you have a ranger in the party, you can just skip exploration altogether and make it, and it's just boring. Um, or whether it's you have to play a very specific kind of game for exploration to matter. Uh, so it'd be interesting to see that. Um, we have a tiny human that is refusing to go down for bed. Uh, so I would be very happy to see them have uh modules in this adventure for how to handle this stuff. Um, just because I'm always looking, I don't have a formal game design background, but I took whatever, pittance of courses were available in college, uh, to study it, and have done a long line of tinkering with things, uh, from a design perspective and dungeon master perspective. So I'm always curious to see like what sort of stuff people come up with, especially when it's coming from Wizards of the Coast and they have access to this huge pool of playtesters, uh, and designers. Um, and if it's the fact that, Chris Perkins comes out and says like, yeah, this adventure is easier if you use social skills, and if you don't just go the combat route, and we wanted to make an adventure that explicitly caters to that style of play, is kind of well, it's a departure from how D&D has kind of become. Um since it's ironic in that like the original editions of D&D, uh, you didn't get experience from combat, you got it from treasure acquisition. So like you were actively rewarded for not fighting and like figuring out the most efficient way to bypass encounters to get to the treasure. Uh, so it often meant like using the other two pillars. And it was just that like, combat was likely, um, for people that were coming at it from a wargaming perspective, uh, doing number crunching and playing and do little tactical movements and everything was enough of a reward in and of itself for doing that. Just saying, maybe I should figure out how to homebrew for treasure equals XP. I'm glad you mentioned that. There is a UA article from 2017, put out by one of the designers from Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of goes into that a little bit. And I have been working on sort of a homebrew version of it, that unfortunately I don't think I can publish or put out because of how the OGL works. Because technically uh, you can't do anything in terms of like character creation or character advancement. But the idea is, for this, it still used the general XP. And what it did was it told you specific things that would give experience points, and then you divide it up between them. So combat gives you a certain amount of experience points, and it's largely still based on CR. Then social interaction, like convincing an NPC of a certain tier based on the sort of tier that your characters are in, gives you a certain amount of experience points. And then exploring a region that is significant to the story, based on, what tier you're in versus, what tier the or like the rarity, I guess, or the scope of the location gives you a certain number of experience points, and like acquiring treasure gives you a certain number of experience points. um I have been trying to retrofit this and do it on a like 100 points of experience, so that it's no longer like this weird, it's not quite linear, not quite exponential. It like levels off at certain tiers and like then shoots right back up. And just making it a flat, like it's 100 experience points to level up. Uh, so 100 experience points to level up, and then, you know, certain activities get you specified number of experience, breaking it down so that like, if we want to do, uh, if you want to split everything up evenly so that you figure it out so that like a third of your experience comes from combat, a third comes from exploration, a third comes from social interaction. And then it gives you points to work with the idea that like, number one, it has to be relevant to the story. Number two, it has to be significant for the party's tier. And it does. So I keep mentioning tier instead of level. So the idea is it breaks the game up into 4 tiers, namely every 5 levels. So you have your heroic tier, your champion tier, your paragon tier, and your epic tier, which is like level 15 to 20. Um, borrowing terminology from 4E. So the idea being that like, if you're level 1 to 5, finding an uncommon magic item, I mean, for most games, from the assumption of the Dungeon Master's Guide, that's a big deal. So the party would get experience points for finding an uncommon magic item. This also assumes that like if you were to just go out and buy one, you don't really get experience points for that. Like if you can just go to a shop and just buy one on the cheap. You don't get anything for common magic items, because those are like healing and stuff that it's assumed that you can buy that, or that it's just like a little minor thing for flavor. And then like, between level 5 and 10, it's like rare magic items. And then 10 to 15 is very rare or epic magic items. And the 15 to 20 is like if you find a legendary item or an artifact. Um, and obviously, if you're level 5 to 10 and you find an epic or very rare magic item, like you get more experience points. But it's also the jurisdiction of the DM to be like, do they like, should they get more experience points or should they just get experience points for finding a magic item? Now, if they were to find stuff that's below their tier, they don't get experience points, or they might get, less experience points. Because it is like you're already getting something, and like it's not really significant, but maybe you get a little bit something extra. Yeah, exploration is like if you discover like a set of ancient ruins that nobody's ever found before, or if you map out an area that's never been mapped before, or if you know, go explore this like old abandoned mine shaft at the edge of town and like come back and report to the town on what's going on. And the idea being like, what is the scope of importance to this location, like of this location to the campaign at large? So thinking about the tiers again, it goes like local, regional, national, global / multiplanar. So, like when you get into like epic tier, like level 15 to 20, it is like discovering a new planet or going like mapping out a plane that has never been discovered before, like a demi-plane that's never been discovered before. Like maybe you get invited to a divine domain. Like you get to go, like as a mortal, you get invited to a god's domain and you get to map it out and then come back and like tell the whole world as to what's out there. And then like for social interaction, it's again like scope of importance. So it kind of works on that like local, regional, national, interplanar, / like global. And then my plan is to break it up and add like a fourth option, which is role playing. And so to, as a way to like, because the DMG encourages people to like give out like little rewards for role playing. So this idea is to like tie it into the ideals, bonds, flaws, and traits system that D&D set up and then never really carried through. So these are things that we're going to try and do if and when Jamora comes back. I would like to use this XP system for that and then talk about it and see, how the audience feels about it. Again, I can't publish it because I would have to put it on DM's Guild. And I don't want to. So, but I'm certainly happy to share that. I can just put it out there for free. So anyway, talked long enough about like this one particular thing about Wild Beyond the Witchlight. To further go into this stuff, actually, Strixhaven is supposedly going to have a whole bunch of modules to cover like this social aspect. So one of the things they talk about is like building relations. So taking exams is going to be a major part of the campaign, apparently. So like studying for exams and like taking them and like using different skill checks to determine like how well you do in your exams, which will, if you do well, give you certain boons and benefits later in an adventure. Like that's an interesting concept that like it's kind of a no-brainer when you think about it. And then coupled with this system of, which I have a feeling is just going to be like a modified renown system, but essentially building relationships and reputations and like a mechanical way to do that with NPCs at the college or the school, or I don't know. I don't know what age group they're looking at for that. Designed to like enhance role play and get you integrated and immersed into the setting. And so like they'll also have like a whole sort of I don't know, like personality trait tree and everything for different NPCs. And like so it might be a case of like which ones you build a reputation with like affect your standing with other ones. So there's been a lot of pushback on this. I have a feeling it's also because they posted some art, um, like of what are two male presenting characters like hugging and looking into each other's eyes. Uh, so it seems like there may be a certain segment of the community um, that kind of needs to be better and needs to do better. That is pushing back against this. Um, but I mean, I think if D&D is in introducing more modules that are like baked in for how to essentially do the other pillars of the game, I think it can only make the game better. Uh, and because it especially addresses the concerns. What I would like to see is if and when the time comes to move to sixth edition, is that this stuff gets baked into the core rules as different rules modules that you can do. That like you can include or throw out as you see fit. I certainly hope that Wizards takes a look at how Cortex is doing things. And like I think that would be a great model for Dungeons and Dragons, as like you set default assumptions. And because they kind of did this with the D20 system of like, here's a base framework that you can then use for like anything. But have like, here are a bunch of modules that you can use for like Dungeons and Dragons. And like you can include or not include them as you see fit. I think that would be a great flexible way of doing that, especially since like if D&D is going to be thought of by the community for better or worse as like the standard for tabletop RPGs, it would do well to be more flexible to try and run different kinds of games in them instead of just like having to rely on like, oh yeah, I mean, we're going to do like a free form social game using Dungeons and Dragons. So like, you know, we're going to use skill checks and we're going to use like a couple different class features and mostly spells, but like, you know, like, I mean, essentially if you build a champion fighter, like you're not going to use most of your class features. Or, you know, if you decide to build like a dragon sorcerer, I mean, you know, some of your features might not come up. Or a hunter ranger, right? Stuff that's very combat oriented. Um, you know, and it could even just be stuff as having alternate features that cater to different aspects of the game, as well as maybe building classes from the ground up that also factor in the three facets of the game. So that like, I mean, the class's name is fighter, but maybe like fighter should not just be limited to fighting. Like there are other things that they can do. Like it shouldn't just be that like, oh, you know, my job is to punch things. I'm not supposed to talk to people or, you know, try and figure out how to go places. Um, you know, maybe there's certain things that they can do like in an urban environment. Like they can use connections that they have to like local fighting rings or gladiatorial arenas or um a mercenary guild or something, you know, that can play into both the exploration and the social tier. Um, but anyway, uh, so yeah, so I'm interested to see what these modules are. Um, Again, I have, especially since they did it for mythical wow, mythical odysseys of Theros. It's got those two th sounds in there that make me want to combine it into that odysseys. Um, so uh they also mentioned like what they're going to do is when you make a character for Strixhaven is you get a free bonus feat that gives you like based on what college you pick, or essentially what house quote unquote you pick, that gives you abilities related to that, essentially related to your major. Now I say this because I'm like, oh, well that sounds familiar. I was kind of doing the same thing for Jamora of like, but it based on culture. Uh, so that's essentially like it seems to be kind of it's a little bit of a band-aid solution, but it's also kind of an elegant one, of just like, yeah, because then we can balance them all against each other. and it's just here's the thing you just tack onto your character, and it gets tacked onto everybody's character, so it only matters if you're going to have, like, if for whatever reason you're playing a homebrew game and like you allow one person to have it and another person to not have it. To which I would say don't. uh, but like if everybody gets one, then it's just a matter of making sure that all the feats are kind of in line with each other. Um, and if they follow a certain like standard, then that's easy enough to do. Um, so yeah. Uh, One thing to note, Wild Beyond the Witchlight will also include player options. So that's something they've done it a couple of times with adventures. They haven't done it very often. Certainly not to this extent where I believe they're gonna have like Feywild oriented classes or subclasses rather, as well as some ancestry options, um, namely the Harangon, and fairies. Um, I guess hobgoblins didn't make the cut. Uh, and Strixhaven is going to have uh oh dear, I forgot what the name is, but it's basically owl folk. So they put them all in the same Unearthed Arcana. Um, let's see. Let me just see if I can find the name. Um, and I can't with a quick Owlin. There we go. So I don't know if that's the name from Magic the Gathering, but yeah. So there we go. And they're featured right on the cover. So no joke about it as to what they're going to appear in. It was thought that maybe they would appear in both the Feywild book and Strixhaven, but I mean, this makes sense. So definitely excited to see how that ended up. And I gotta say, like, Strixhaven, and I've mentioned this before to some friends. Strixhaven went from, I'll pick it up because my group has the legendary bundle on D&D Beyond. So like, um, I don't know if I agree with that assumption since fairies are going to be able to fly. And the UA had them fly. Um, I personally think flying is overrated by the community. Because every time I've had players that like had unlimited flight, it was a non-issue. Like, I mean, because oftentimes like it's also the way climbing is done in the book by the rules is you you don't necessarily have to make like athletics checks to climb. It's only if you want to move at like full speed. Because like you can just climb at half speed. You're thinking Adventurers League. This assumes that Strixhaven is even going to be available for Adventurers League, which is probably not the case. Most settings aren't. They have one for Forgotten Realms, and they have one for Eberron. They did say with Strixhaven that the intent is that you would be able to drop Strixhaven like into any campaign setting. Did they do Raven? I'm not sure. I was under the impression that like the Eberron one was like a one-time thing. But maybe. I mean, the simple solution is they just don't. I mean, is they just don't do a Strixhaven one. Or they just say you can't play an Owlin. I could also see them saying that. I will clarify. I don't play Adventurers League. So, and I also don't know if Wizards balances stuff around Adventurers League. My hope is that they don't, and that they design stuff how they want to design stuff. They took flight away from Aarakocra. I presume for Adventurers League. Which I mean that's just something with organized play. But I guess my case would, then it's probable that they will fly and that you just won't be able to do it for AL. So, um, but back to my previous point. So my group has the legendary bundle on D&D Beyond. So this went from a like, I'll get it so that we have access to the content in there, but like not super excited about it, to now I'm really interested to see what these systems are going to be from a design perspective to be able to utilize that elsewhere. Um, and kind of take it from like a uh like stripping away all of the fluff and looking at like, what can I do with these mechanics and what can I do with them elsewhere. So I'm very excited about that. Like it went from not excited really, but I'll get it, to like this is now high up on the list. Especially with that alt cover. That alt cover just looks so gorgeous. Um and I gotta say, I'm a sucker for alt covers for these books. Um, you know, because a lot of the ones that they've come out with recently have been really good. Um, so I mean, like I picked up the Salt Marsh one. Uh, wasn't really interested in the alt cover, but I wanted to throw a couple extra bucks to the local game store, so I did. Um, but it's like, I kind of actually like the original art better. But this is a case where, uh, yeah, all three. Well, I think I might actually still do the uh the base cover for Wild Beyond the Witchlight. But it's like, it's got a hobgoblin with a pocket watch. Like I can't forego that. Like I can't let go of that. So, all right. Um we're getting pretty close to wrapping things up. Do we have any final questions? Uh why not both? I it's so I don't want to say that money's tight, but it's I cannot justify buying both. So I got to pick one. Uh, so I will likely end up getting the original cover for Wild Beyond the Witchlight and then the alt covers for the other two books. Um, which is also, that's huge. The fact that like I'm actually interested in picking up the physical books for all three of these instead of just being like, I'll just get it on D&D Beyond. I don't really need the physical book for it. So, any final thoughts? Final questions? Concerns? Still bummed there was no alt cover for Wildmount. Um, I that's understandable. Because that was a special case. There's no alt, as far as I know, there's no alt cover for the Yak Inc. book either. Um, and I think that's okay. Um, all right then. There is an alt cover for the Yak Inc. book. Um, weird. Oh, I guess there was. I don't know if I have that book. Oh, I do believe I have the alt cover of that book. I had assumed that the alt cover was the standard cover. Uh, or I don't know which one's the standard and which one's the alt cover. Um, it seems like the alt cover, quote unquote, is the one that looks like a normal D&D book, and the standard cover is the one done by Penny Arcade. Maybe, or maybe that is the alt cover. I'm not sure. I mean, the other thing is though is like I think they used, like I think they tapped someone that typically does art for Critical Role to do the cover. So like I don't know what the alt cover would really look like. Um, but then I don't know. Uh, I think it's fine. Um, so all right. Um, so normally we do quest log. Um, as long as Courtney's taking a hiatus from the podcast, at least until we know what we're looking at as far as a time frame, if there is a time frame, and basically once we have a handle on what we're doing and what the plan going forward should be in perpetuity. I think we're gonna hold off on quest logs. So quest logs normally we talk about like what goals we have and stuff. Um, so I think we're just gonna hold off on that segment. Until Courtney's okay, and that if and when she wants to come back. All right. So that said, plan going forward. My goal, instead of doing these solo casts, is to attempt to do interviews. To basically get like a guest on each week. And essentially like pick a topic and talk about that topic for an hour. And essentially like pick a topic, do a deep dive. So not necessarily doing quick fire news. It'll be a special format. So like I said, next week, I think we'll talk about the Steam Deck and maybe like how it interacts with the Switch OLED. Like, what does that mean? What is it like? What does it mean for like in terms of value versus like other options? Like, kind of the cheaper like Xbox and sort of what sort of budget options gamers have these days. um, and sounds like a good patron segment. So this is just going to be the regular podcast, because ultimately I don't want to keep doing these solo casts and just talking by myself for an hour. As you can tell, my voice is getting a little worn out. So next week we're going to have sort of friend of the podcast and pro wrestler and podcaster Joey Image. So we'll talk about, I got a feeling he's got some opinions on the Steam Deck and that sort of stuff. Thinking of talking to patrons or doing long form Q&A. I do like that idea, Errant Engineer. I just have to get buy-in. And shout out and thank you to all the patrons, but getting feedback has been very difficult. So and like getting responses back has been difficult. So then the following week, gonna be a little bit of a flip. I'm actually going to be interviewed on the podcast by the folks at McCarty Productions, who are working on a podcast of their own that interviews like small streamers and like what they're doing and how they got into it and stuff. So I'll have them on. And then I'm still working past that, but I have a couple things out there. So we'll see. If you have any suggestions or if you're a content creator that has like a particular niche and you listen to the podcast, or you know of someone who occupies a particular sort of geeky niche that you think would be a good guest, let me know. Hit me up on social media. Send me a direct message. You can email me at Sean, SEAN, at 8-bitadventures.com. And let me know, because it would be a big help to me. So I'm trying to look, and it's a little tough when you're kind of a little guy trying to reach out to places. So all right, we're gonna wrap this episode up. Thank you everybody for joining me for this podcast. If you want to see more content from 8-Bit Adventures, you can head on over to 8-bitadventures.com. Check that out. We've got comics, artwork, podcasts, streams, and more. I have my portfolio up there, art portfolio. I think I still got to upload like my fan art stuff. There was a comic that went up this week. Little Zelda Breath of the Wild comic that went up this week, so be sure to check that out. If you want to help support that content, you can subscribe right here on Twitch, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/8bitadventures. Big shout out and thank you to all of our current patrons. even though I kind of threw you under the bus for the feedback thing. But your support is very appreciated. So I want to make that clear. And every little bit helps. So like I know some folks have had to cut back a little bit. Um, it still means the world to me for the support that you are giving. And even if you're not able to provide any monetary support, just emotional support, signal boosting, and all that stuff, very much appreciated. Um, Also, going to give the old reminder of if you are an Amazon Prime subscriber, you get one free Twitch Prime subscription each month. Uh, if you're not using it for any channel and you want to throw it our way, that would be greatly appreciated. Um, our opening theme to close things out is One Up by Professor Shy Guy. You can find his work over at professorshyguy.bandcamp.com. And with that, this episode is at a wrap. So, as always, have fun, everyone. Happy gaming and enjoy your pie cake.